And good. The recording says it's working. Let's hope it is. The lunch one did work. So we had reports that it wasn't, but it did seem to record. Any case, we are in Bava Batra, continuing up, this time chapter 2, Mishnah 1. Exactly. So chapter 2 is going to continue with discussions of how what you do on your property affects people next to you.
This is a person.
That's good. That's good. Right, so we're going to be doing a lot of drawings tonight of, Mr. A and Mr. B, of people who have different property that are next to each other and how that relationship will work. So let me go ahead and actually draw up a quick map because we're going to need it right off the bat. We're going to have Mr. A and Mr. B. Actually, that's a bad drawing. Excuse me. Because we need to make them a little closer. Boom. There's Mr. B. All right. So just wait for the last person to come in. The tension is killing me. Who will it be? Drum roll. I hear them coming. Here we are. All right. We're set. All right. So chapter 2, Mishnah 1, Aaron.
One may not dig a cistern near his fellow cistern.
Okay. Cisterns. What are cisterns? Cisterns are a hole in the ground for water. Right? You dig a hole in the ground and you put water in it, or you catch water from the rain in it. That's what we mean by a cistern. So if you want to dig a cistern, if your neighbor has one, let's imagine your neighbor has a cistern, where can you dig yours? That's the issue that we're dealing with here. Well, not far away. We have to get farther. We have to get an analysis. So that's part 2. Right? The basic idea is not near, but how near is near?
Nor may he dig a ditch, cave, water channel, or laundry pool, unless it is 3 handbreadths away from his fellow's wall, and he must plaster it with lime.
All right, so we've got 3 tfachim, right? 3 handbreadths. That's about 12 inches. So you're looking at about a foot away from your fellow. So what it's basically saying, we're going to use this example over here, that this is Mr. A's cistern, is that you need to have 3 handbreadths, right? 12 inches. And on the other side, 3. And then you can dig yours. All right? You need to have at least the 3 tefachim between you and your fellow's property. And he has to have 3 on his side as well. All right? So that means you'd have a total of 6. 2 feet in between the actual walls of the cistern, which are going to be, hold on, I've got multiple colors, I can use them, which are going to be covered in lime. That's really squeaky. Right? You're going to use like a plaster on the inside, because if you didn't, then the water would would seep through the sides, and then that would destroy the other person's. And that's the main idea here, that if somebody's dug a hole and you dig a hole too close, the wall between them just falls apart. And the idea is, even though it's your property, you're not allowed to dig in a way that will damage his property. That's kind of the theme of this entire chapter, is just because it's your property doesn't mean you can do whatever you want. Right? It's maybe your property, but what you do on your property can affect the other person. On the other hand, the law wants to be as free as possible because it is your property, right? You should be able to use it. So they're trying to balance how much can you use without hurting the next person. Make sense? Onward.
They distance piles of olive refuse, manure, salt, lime, or stones 3 handbreadths from his wall, and he plasters it with lime. All
right, so this was when we're talking about holes, but what happens if you've got a pile of stuff, right? You got from your cow all of that's falling out, and you make a big pile, and then there is a wall, right? How far do you have to make sure your pile is away from the wall? And again, the answer is 3. And you have to lay down a layer of plaster on top of it to keep it from radiating the heat that might damage the wall between you and your neighbor. Make sense?
How do you plaster a pile?
So plaster comes in lots of different consistencies. What they're talking about here is just like liquid. So you would just like pour runny like plaster of Paris over the edge, and it would just make a little bit of a coating. It's not permanent. It's not expensive. It's just, you just smear it on. Yeah, lovely stuff. Part 3. Oh no, we did part 3. Part 4. Sorry.
They distance seeds and a plow and urine 3 handbreadths from the wall.
All right. So this means if you are urinating, right? You go up to the wall. You have to be away from his wall before you do that. Also, if you are plowing, in the field and you're running your plow, you have to be away from his wall. And if you're putting seeds down, you have to be away from his wall. Again, all of these things, it's on your property, but if you do it, it can damage the wall between you. And as we saw, the wall is jointly owned, and therefore you are limited in what you can do with it. Make sense? Part 5.
Right. And they distance the mill from the wall, 3 handbreadths from the lower millstone and 4 handbreadths from the upper millstone.
Okay, so in the old days, you would have a stone like that. Then you would have another stone that you'd put, I'm not a very good artist here, you put on top. And the top stone, you'd have like a little handle on it, and you would grind on like that, and then the wheat would go inside and you'd make your flour or other things. Well, that grinding is causing vibrations. And if the vibrations are too close to the wall, then you're shaking his wall constantly, and eventually his wall is going to fall apart. That'll crack the plaster, it'll crack the rocks, the bricks, whatever. So you need to move it far enough away. And they say when the wall is here, you have to have 3 for the lower and 4 for the upper stone. Right? You need to make sure there's enough distance that the vibrations are not going to damage the wall. Right? And that's because the upper one's moving more, so it has more vibration. The bottom one is heavier and is not quite as bad. Make sense? I know, we're all farmers. So for all of these, actually go ahead and read part 6, and then we'll talk about how we understand these when none of this is what we do in our life.
And they distance the oven from the wall, 3 from the belly of the oven and 4 from the rim of the oven. All right,
so most of us think of ovens as being that thing in our kitchen, right? No, usually the oven was outside, and the oven would be kind of like a dome, right? It would be sort of like that, made out of clay, right? And put the fire inside, and then you would either cook things on the outside, like bread. You could just slap bread on the outside, or else there would be like ledge inside that you'd put things in the oven. Well, that gets hot. That's like a full fireplace, and the heat is just going everywhere. It doesn't have beautiful insulated metal walls like our modern ovens. So they were worried that if you put your oven too close to your neighbor's property, the heat is going to damage their property.
Is that essentially a grill with covered grill?
Yeah. I mean, think of it like a poorly insulated barbecue, right? The kind that have like the lids, except their lid didn't just go on a hinge like that. That was built in one shape. So, and this type of oven, by the way, is still used around the world to this day, right? If you go to Israel, but I mean, if you go to many poor countries, that's an oven, right? The oven is just a big dome, and you build a fire at one level, and you either cook on the outside or you have a little ledge inside, and you cook on that, and that's how you cook your food. No, for pita, absolutely, yeah. This is where you get the best bread for flat types of bread.
Yeah, for pizza. That's the way that in why they bake the pizza.
Mm-hmm. So it's still yours. All right, now It's still used, but most of us don't actually use it, right? How many people here plow your backfield, right? Raise your hand. How many people here? How many people are digging a cistern, right? No, I don't see any hands. Okay, so how do we understand not only this part, this Mishnah 1, how do we understand all of chapter 2 and much of Bava Batra? Well, it's establishing principles, not only specific ideas. The specific ideas, yes, are important, and each detail can be used, and the Talmud will discuss each detail of why it's written that way. But the general principles here are, when I try to use my property, what potential damage could this cause to my neighbor? Right? I know I'm not allowed to damage my neighbor's property directly. Right? If I sit in my yard and I throw rocks through my neighbor's window, everybody knows that's wrong. But if I sit in my yard and I build something that's going to break my neighbor's property, that's still potentially wrong, depending upon how much distance. Because maybe I build my cistern 3 away, but his cistern still gets damaged. In that particular case, I would not be liable, right? I would not have to pay for the damage to his cistern because I followed the code, I followed the rule. If you didn't follow the rule, then of course you're going to be responsible for the damages that are caused.
And I know later on, doesn't it say even if you follow the rules, you still have to pay them?
We're going to get there because that's a very specific question about ovens. Yeah. So there's a very specific question that's going to come up in a minute, but we handle questions as they appear so that everyone's on the same page. Everyone got the general principle here, that this is about how you use your property in a way that doesn't damage someone else's property within the limits of the rules.
Oh, the oven.
Yes.
They say 3 from the belly and 4 from the rib. Handbread?
Yes, exactly. And it's because the oven is curved.
Yeah.
Right. So you have the top is narrower than the bottom. Exactly.
Sorry, one more.
That's okay.
Would modern house still follow this? Because as technology changes, it seems like all these measurements would change too.
So measurements can absolutely change. So, for example, in the modern world, if you were dealing with like a steel tank that you were going to put into your property, then you would have to do your own analysis, which actually I'm sure most modern states have, of how much room you need between your steel tank and your neighbor's property in order to know what will be safe. So yes, the measurements will change as the technology continues to change as well. Likewise, if you were digging in an area where the soil was very weak, like Florida, where all the dirt is very sandy, then you probably need more room between your cistern and your neighbor's cistern, because otherwise it will collapse more easily. So yeah, the particulars matter for the ruling of any individual situation. But the general rule of you can't do something that will cause this harm when it's done negligently is the principle we need to remember.
So these were only meant to apply to in the land of Israel at this time?
These were meant to apply at all time in similar circumstances.
Right.
And to apply in similar ways in different circumstances. Right? So if the circumstances change, that's fine, but the principle remains the same. And if the circumstances are identical, then the ruling would be identical.
So following his question, if I understood his question, the ruling here is based in the land of Israel and the reality of the land of Israel, the soil of Israel.
As a default, yes.
Yeah, what happens if you are in France or in Germany or another country with a different kind of soil?
Right, then it adjusts.
Adapt and
Yes.
adjust the measures.
Absolutely. So that's why I said, if you're like in Florida where the ground is very sandy, then of course you're going to need more room. And if you were in a place where you were using a metal liner, like a tank, then the rule would be very different as well. So yeah, it depends on the local circumstances, but the principle remains the same. All right, Mishnah 2, yeah.
Mishnah 2. One may not set up an oven inside the house unless there is a space of 4 cubits above it.
Okay, so now, don't you wish there was like a button you could push and it would just clean? Now we're dealing with neighbors in an apartment building.
We call this smart board.
Yeah, I know, but smart boards don't have such a smart price.
Yeah, or very smart price for the producer.
For the producer, yeah, not for me to buy one. All right, so now we have A and B, and they live in the same building, but one person is upstairs, one person's downstairs, right? And person A wants to build his oven, and this time he's going to build it inside the house. So the question is, how much distance does he need between the top of his oven and the floor, which is the next guy's apartment?
How can they allow him at all to build it? Because you're talking about not only heat, also fire
Mhm.
hazards and heat also.
And smoke.
And smoke
Yep.
and everything. Why did they allow at all to build something inside?
Because sometimes you didn't have access to a space outside to do your cooking. This was all you had.
But sorry, so
So
maybe
sorry you can't cook.
no, maybe use the roof of the beam.
You may not own,
as a
but you may not own the roof.
No, but maybe you can make a deal with B, so they something Meshutab, something community that together
So, but
to
Natan,
do the roof.
you can always make a deal. The halacha doesn't tell you you have to build an oven in your house. The halacha tells you if this is the only place you can build an oven, here are the rules. If you can come up with, like you said, meshutaf, a partnership for doing this together, hareze meshubach, this is wonderful. No one's forcing you to build the oven in your living room. But if you want to build it in your living room, you do have permission if you follow this rule. And what is the rule? The rule is that it has to be 4, but it's cubits, it's amot, not tfachim. So the 4 cubits is basically equal to about 6 foot, right? Or about 2 meters. And that means that between the top and the ceiling, you need 6 foot worth of clearance. Right, so here, if I built my oven, and it came up to about there, it would be okay for this part, not for the beam, but for the other area, right? For the flat part of the roof, because there's about 6 foot between here and there.
So what happened if because your oven they are now on fire?
We're gonna get that. We're gonna get that. It's in this Mishnah, I promise.
Okay.
Yeah, you're a couple lines ahead. All right, so that's the basic idea. There needs to be 4 amot. There needs to be 4 cubits, about 6 foot, 2 meters between the oven and the roof above you. All right, part A.
If he sets it up in the upper room, the flooring beneath it must be 3 handbreadth deep.
All right.
Or for a stove, 1 handbreadth.
All right, so a stove was considered to be a small oven. So it's not as hot, it's not as damaging. But for this, we're now at Mr. B's apartment, and Mr. B wants to make his stove. He needs to have space below the stove before you get to this guy's house.
How heavy is the oven? How heavy were the oven?
It depends how big you made it.
No, because that's why, because if this building an oven
Right.
and it's very heavy, can
So-
damage the
roof, the floor, yeah.
the ceiling between the living dome.
They weren't usually heavier than a person. So if you can
They
walk,
were not.
if you can walk on your floor, the oven's fine. Think like in nowadays you go to Home Depot or whatever, you can get those backyard chimney things that you can put firewood in, like for your patio.
Winter, yeah.
Yeah, for your patio. I know in Florida, who needs it? But it looks pretty, right? And they're clay pots with like a little chimney sticking out the top, right? Something like that, although they're usually not quite so tall for the old stoves. Something like that would be an example. So yeah, maybe it weighs 50, 60, 70 pounds.
That's it.
Yeah, it's not like 500 pounds of brick.
More heavy.
No. That for that you need like a furnace, and then it's much harder to use. All right, so here the question isn't above, of course, because there's no one above. The question is, what about the damage you're causing to the guy below you? And so the answer they have is that it has to be. Let me just make sure that right. Right. So it's 3 tefachim, right? Which is going to be about 12 inches, right? Which is about in meters. 12 is it like 24 centimeters, 5 centimeters, a little bit more, maybe about 30 centimeters, a third of a meter, yeah, about like that. It's this much, and you need that as a protection for the heat going down. Make sense? Okay. Now we get to the question that everyone's been asking.
And if it causes damage to the floor, he must pay for the damage caused.
Go ahead and read A, because this is an argument.
Rabbi Shimon says they only mention these measurements so that if the object caused damage, he would be exempt.
Okay, so Rabbi Shimon says, wait a minute, what do you mean he still has to pay? Right? If they're mentioning the distance, that means that if you follow the rules, you're off the hook. Not when it comes to this, not for this category. And Rabbi Shimon loses this argument. Right? The halacha goes according to the Mishnah in general, which is if you put an oven in your living room and you follow the rules of the distance between your oven and the roof, and you burn your neighbor's roof or his floor, you're going to be paying to fix it. But if you didn't follow the rules and it happened, you'd be even worse off because now you're negligent. Right? There's a difference between whether I did something that was criminally stupid and I did something that was right that still happened to have a mistake. And this is, if you're following the rules, you just have to pay for the damages, but you're not going to pay any additional penalties for being dangerous.
How come it doesn't talk about penalties in this? And when I was reading the example, I was thinking about if you drive on the road,
Right.
you follow all the traffic signs and you get in a wreck, you still got to pay. It's not
Right.
So, I mean, that was the only comparison.
You do, but if you're driving down the road and you don't follow the traffic signs, and you're going 90 miles an hour and you get into an accident, you're going to pay and you're going to be punished.
If it's too reckless, but if you're just going maybe 10 over, I don't think there's an extra.
Well, the definition of reckless will depend upon the circumstances and the court and how good a lawyer you have. But yeah, so the definition of reckless will be added if the city feels that that's the appropriate definition of how you were driving. Right? So I could be driving safely, following the signs and the speed limit, but drinking a Coke and texting on my phone, even though I'm going the speed limit, when I cause an accident, the city could still say I was reckless. Because reckless is not just about how well I followed the speed limit and the other signs. It's other ways of how I'm driving, or if I'm shooting in and out of traffic, that can also be called reckless, especially if I cause an accident. So yeah, it's recklessness will always add to the penalty. And this is saying if you follow the rules, you're not reckless, but you're still responsible.
How's this different than the last Mishnah?
The danger here is more apparent because of the fire directly to the situation that you're involved in, right? Fire is, as one of the main categories of damage, is always considered something that you have to be especially cautious of in circumstances.
It looks like this is a fine print.
Well,
screwed anyway,
No, you're not. You're still better off following the rules, right? You're still better off following the rules. And the opposite, Rabbi Shimon's position is also problematic. To think, hey, I followed the rules, and if the whole thing burnt down, it's not my fault. It's like, well, no, you still built the oven. You are still responsible for how your property damages someone else.
Don't build the minimum. Give an extra inch.
Give as much extra as you possibly can.
Or do what you said.
Or do it outside.
Yeah, exactly.
Or come up with an agreement to.
I came too late. I'm sorry.
We're gonna share. We're
too late.
going to share an oven on the roof. No. You're not too late. Again, I will say this until I am blue. The Mishnah doesn't tell us what you should do. It tells us how to handle the situation when it's gone wrong and you're in court. And the Dayan, the judge, has to make a decision of does Mr. A or does Mr. B have to pay to fix this? And absolutely, the judge can say, look, Mr. A, you're responsible to fix this. Mr. B and Mr. A, after he fixes the floor, you should talk about a better way to handle the oven in this apartment. The judge can't force them to come to a different agreement, but he can encourage them to compromise, come up with a better arrangement, figure out a way to share a stove, whatever is necessary to make sure that the fire doesn't happen.
Yeah. So I think we've been talking about damages for breaking the rules.
Mm-hmm.
Are you entitled to something like that would be considered like maybe injunctive relief? Like if they're
I'm not sure what that means in American law.
So like let's say if the oven was too close to the floor,
right?
Can you go to the court and say, hey, you got to make him, either get rid of the oven or lift it off the floor?
Yes. If your neighbor's property is built in a way that will violate this, and so therefore the potential is there to cause the damage, and that's why the rule was in place in the first place, then absolutely you can go to the Beit Din and say, he just dug right up on the property line, and that means that my cistern is now in danger. You don't have to wait for your cistern to collapse before you can cause him to fill in the old one, his one, and move it. So yes, you are allowed to get to the court to force him to comply if you know that he is violating one of these rules, right? Or something different. If you're living, like I said, when we talked about different types of soil, if you're living in a Japanese house where it's all made out of paper and really, really easy to catch fire, the rule might be different about how much distance you need as well. And likewise, if you're living in a giant stone castle where nothing can burn, the rule might be different there too. That's the importance of having the judge make a ruling for your circumstances. All right, coming around, Mishnah 3.
One may not open a bakery or dry shop under his fellow's storehouse, nor a cattle store.
All right, so nowadays we have zoning laws. This is an early form of zoning. And the idea is that if Mr. B has, barrels of fruit up here, I cannot be a baker.
We saw this before with the guy that was dealing with the skin of the animal.
Tanning, we're going to get that as well, yes.
But when was that? In which?
In one of the other Bavas.
Oh,
Yeah. Talking about some of the other damages. So here's the problem, right? What's going to happen in a bakery? It gets hot, right? And if the heat, I speak English, the heat goes up, the heat's going to damage everything in Mr. B's storehouse. And the same thing, if I have cows in there, then that's going to be pretty nasty for all of the food that's stored up in here. So, and a dyer is the person who would color the clothes, right?
Leather.
Well, leather is different. We're going to get to that, right? But for dyeing, it's for coloring, and this is also a very, very nasty process. Nowadays, we do it in some other country or where we never see it. But dyeing is a really, really horrible way of polluting things around you, and the smell and the fumes and everything is horrible. So you can't do that underneath my stuff because your fumes will ruin my goods. And just saying, hey, it's in my apartment, I can do what I want. No, you can't.
But could be either way. Could be also if it's the baker or whatever the other one in the deed.
So
it's both ways.
So, well, here the issue is very much the hot air going up, right? And from the bakery. But you're right, Mr. B can't do something up here that would be bad for Mr. A's life below. Exactly. It does go both directions. It's just these examples are about bad stuff going up.
Is this who's ever first in time, does he get priority?
So generally speaking, yes. So we're going to actually see that even more in the second half of chapter 2, when they start talking about trees and the location of the city and things like that. But generally speaking, if you can prove that one was here before the other, then the one that's there first gets first right away. But if you can't prove it, then Mr. B would have the right of way. He would, if you don't know who was there first, the storage unit is going to get priority.
Is it because he's claiming? Is it because it's claiming damage that he gets priority?
Exactly. And because the general prohibition is not to be underneath, so don't do it. Part 2 is about the shop.
We're going to read in truth.
Oh, sorry. In truth, my mistake. Yes, part A. Yes.
In truth, they have permitted these things under a whinstone, but not a cattle store.
Okay, so if these are not barrels of fruit, but if these are barrels of wine, then having a bakery or other things might be okay, because apparently they felt that the heat actually made the wine better. Now, I don't know if that's true by wine standards. I'm not a wine connoisseur, but the principle is if it's not causing damage, then it's not actually a problem. And that may depend on what's inside those barrels. Make sense? But cows are always bad, right? No one wants to be above the cows.
This This is different than the original rule that the person claiming damages has the burden, right? Because in the example you gave, the person claiming damages.
So this person isn't claiming the damage. This person is claiming that they have the right to be free from this person down below.
All right, so the person who, it's basically an injustice. So the person
Right,
claiming
yes.
the harm does not have the burden.
In this particular case, the harm is trying to be prevented, right? The person, Mr. B, is saying Mr. A can't open up a bakery below me because if he does, it will damage my goods, right? Therefore, Mr. A isn't allowed to even begin to open up his bakery.
Right. I was just saying, but if it's who was there first, it's the person who's claiming damage has the
Nope.
other person has the burden, right?
Who was there first
Right.
would be allowed to continue to use the property as they did, as long as it was very clear.
I mean, the burden of establishing who was there first lay with the person.
No, who was establishing who was there first would be who was there first.
Right, but who has the burden to prove who was there first?
They both do. If they're both claiming they were there first, then both of their claims would be evaluated. And if one was a superior claim, that would be the one that was followed. If they were equal claims,
Right.
hold that thought until we get to our discussion about trees in the city. Okay, now part two.
A man may protest against another that opens a shop within the courtyard and say to him, I cannot sleep because of the noise of them that goes in and out.
All right, so again, back then they had different types of zoning. For us, most people, they didn't have a home and also have a shop. They had a home. And if someone wanted to buy something from them, they came to their home. And that would be a little distracting to somebody who lived in the same courtyard area because people were coming and going and coming and going and coming and going. So if I live in the courtyard, I can say, look, you're not allowed to have your shop here. Right? You can't buy and sell from your house because it is too distracting to the rest of us who need to sleep. Make sense? But it's quite a big limitation. Now, again, if you can get everyone to agree, you can. But if they choose to protest, they have the right to shut down the buying and selling. However,
One who makes utensils should go outside and sell them in the market.
all right, you should, when you are making utensils, take them and then go to the market and sell them in the market, right? You don't actually have a shop, but you just lay out your blanket and you put your spoons out there. And if people want to buy from you, they buy from you there. Don't make them come to the courtyard. However, when it comes to making your spoons in the first place, that's part 3. Part 3A.
But none may protest and say to him, I cannot sleep because of the noise of the hammer, or because of the noise of the millstone, or because of the noise of children.
Okay, so if you're actually making spoons and you're going tink, 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 your neighbors can't complain because that's your job. Right? I'm a spoon maker. Where am I supposed to make my spoons if I don't make them here? This is my home, my workshop, my everything. So if I'm banging out my spoons, you can't complain. And also if I'm grinding my food, you can't complain because I need it. And the question of children, the commentators all understand this as being talking about students, right? If students come and go from your house while you're trying to teach them, and they're annoying the neighbors, tough. The students need to learn, and they have to come to the teacher, right? The teacher can't sit out in the marketplace and teach. Right? It's not like selling spoons. You need a place to teach. And so therefore, even if the children are annoying the neighbors have to put up with it for study.
Right, but there's no priority of being first here, right?
No, this is your right to use your property. You are allowed to use your property to make your trade, to grind your food, to teach students. And even if the other person lived there and you move in and you're a spoon maker, and he says, well, we've had a quiet courtyard for 20 years, and I'm not sure you should be hammering the spoons. You can tell him, tough. My house, my job, I need my spoons.
Also, if I know that the guy's running a shop out of his house and I move in knowing that, I can go ahead and shut him down.
I can shut him down. Yep, you can shut him down. Now, again, does that make you a nice neighbor? Not exactly. But you absolutely have the right. Even if you agreed, it's okay, fine, have your shop. And then after 3 months, you're like, man, it's like every hour, there's so much noise. You are allowed to go back and shut it down later, even if you had agreed initially to allow it to happen.
Did they have like regulation regulations about?
These are regulations.
Yeah, I know, but no, about time.
Oh. You mean like what time do you have to stop?
You can use, yeah.
Not exactly. So they didn't have like what time in the morning can you use your leaf blower, right? So, but they would usually come to certain understandings about when you could or couldn't make certain noises. And for most people, work didn't go on that late at night because every hour you stayed up was expensive because you were burning oil to stay up. Because otherwise, well, actually, most fires were not made from most light wasn't made from wood fires. It was made from oil fires. Because wood fires, it's hard to have a wood fire that gives off enough light that isn't like a fireplace fire. And so most people would just prefer using a little oil lamp. But when you're burning oil, you're burning money. And there's a very good book called The Rational Optimist. Sorry, that's the digression. But he goes through how much did a person have to work to get 1 hour of light. And in like the ancient world, you had to work for like 2-3 hours to be able to afford enough oil to give you 1 hour of light. And nowadays, you have to work for about less than a second, right? Electricity and light bulbs are so cheap that the amount of work you need for an average job to be able to have an hour worth of light is tiny. I mean, yes, if you want to have a refrigerator, if you want to have a fancy stereo, the electricity is a lot more. Computers take a lot more, but light takes so little energy from us now.
Not exactly directly, but indirectly, if you take into account global warming and everything damage to the planet that you are paying with your health and in taxes,
okay,
so
yes,
it's more expensive.
Well, I'm not sure because remember, people back then lived with their wood stoves and
not only
right.
1 second.
It's more than 1 second. Yes, what's the term? The external costs. Right, the external costs are larger than just the initial cost that comes on your electric bill. That is absolutely true. But what he was trying to say is that humanity actually is much better at providing for itself now than we ever used to be. And we therefore have more options. You know, the fact that we can stay up now at 7:45 and have our lectures and our study and be together with family,
AC,
have air conditioning. I mean, it's a miracle. And it allows our lives to be much richer. Ancient people, they went to sleep when the sun went down. When it got too dark, they were asleep. Right? They were done, partly because they were tired, but also because how could you stay up unless there was a nice moon and you were outside? It just went dark, you went to bed. And then when the light came up, you got up and you went to work. We are able to add extra hours of meaningful activity and enjoyable activity to our lives because of the modern world. And so therefore, that was a little different. We should be very glad we're alive now. But like you said, yes, we do need to still be careful on how we're spending all of that extra energy. Chapter 2, Mishnah 4. I believe, Natan, you're our reader. Speaking of having good neighbors.
If one's wall adjoins that of his neighbor, he may not join another wall to it, unless he places it for a month away from it. As to windows.
Pause. All right, so I need to draw my picture. Whoop, just lost it. We're looking down at this point, right? Blueprint. So that's Mr. A's wall. And there's a wall over here as well. And I want to build a new wall going this way, right? This is Mr. B's wall. The question is, how close can I build my wall to Mr. A? And the answer is 4 amot, right? 4 amot, which is about 6 feet, which is about 2 meters.
And what happened with the land between them?
The land between it it depends on whose property it is. But even if it is your property, you're not allowed to build your wall up against his wall, right? So let's say that all this property belongs to Mr. B, right? You can't build your wall against. Now, could you talk to Mr. A? And could you make an agreement that you can build your house like that and share his wall? Of course, you can agree that. But if he's not up for that, and if you want to build your wall freestanding and separate, even if that's your property, you can't build on it.
But you can use the property, the land.
The land is still available, still usable, and in fact, it should be. And the Talmud argues that the reason you need to keep this open is so that people can walk on it, because the walking of the people stamps the ground down and makes the walls more stable. That helps the foundation. That's the argument about why. Sorry, I'm just looking for the cap. Of why you can't build too close. You have to make sure that there's still enough room for walking. They also point out that even if there have been lots of people walking, you're not allowed to build it closer, saying, "Oh, it must be fine by now." You still have to keep that 4-foot easement between, 4 amot easement between you and your neighbor's wall. Make sense? Okay, so that's for walls. Now we get to windows. Windows are much more fun.
The windows above, below, and level with them for a month.
Okay.
But didn't saw something about windows that can be in front of your neighbor, so that they have privacy. We need to have privacy.
That's what we're dealing with here, but we're dealing with the walls, not with building windows in your own building. All right, so I'm going to try and draw this in a way that makes sense, I think. That's a window, right? My beautiful, beautiful house. Boom. Boom. It's a square house. It's just boring house. The door's on the other side. Don't worry. The issue here is privacy. Because if I build my wall in a way that lets me, for example, let's say I build my wall here, right, in front of your house, but now I can stand on the wall and look in your window, and that's a problem, right? Because now it's like, oh, what are they doing in there? Yeah, 3,000, 2,000 years ago, people were still doing the same thing. On the other hand, if I want to build the wall higher, I have to build it a lot higher, because otherwise I could lean over and look inside, right? So the wall has to be at least 4 above and at least 4 below, which is basically enough distance that a human being wouldn't be able to look inside to the window and peek.
What about light?
Not only that, I was thinking what happened with the view. What happened if you had a view of the lake or something, and someone built a wall?
Okay,
and
so
you stop that. That's a damage to your property.
it is and it isn't. So the question of light is where we have here. So in our text, it says the higher or lower or level with them. The level with them is talking about this distance, the distance between your wall and their wall that has the window in it. And that also needs to be 4 amot, because otherwise there isn't enough light, there isn't enough air. You're covering their window.
Yeah.
Now, if you're covering their window and it covers their view, as long as you're doing it on your property, it's okay, right? Your property is your property, and if you want to build a wall, even if they now no longer get a view, you're allowed to do that on your property.
You damaged the value of my property now.
Now I
So you
reduced
damaged
the property value, and I understand. Well, I haven't actually damaged anything,
Yes.
and I did it on my property.
Yes, but as we said before, with the wars and everything
Mhm.
last week, indirectly, yes, you are producing an economical damage.
If I build a house on my property, like let's say when you move in, my area is an empty field, and I decide I want to build a house there, and you say, but I like the field. Am I not allowed to build my house because you enjoy looking at the field? Of course not. I can build my house. If I build my house and it's an ugly house, I'm just a bad architect and the house is hideous, can you say, build a different one? That one's not pretty for me. No. Now, in the modern world, your homeowner association is going to tell you what it looks like. It's going to tell you what colors it can be. It's going to tell you what plants you can plant and all of, because of exactly your worry that people say your house damages my house by how your house looks. I hate to tell you this, the rabbis didn't have an HOA, right? Your property was your property. And as long as you follow the general rules, you could build what you wanted to build. And those rules were all you had to worry about. Now, could a group get together and all agree that they were going to do things together. Of course, like the courtyard would come to agreements of what color they would paint or whatever, but they couldn't force someone to be part of that because you are allowed to use your property. There's a very interesting thing in the rabbinic literature, because in modern American conversations, you tend to have some people on a political spectrum who think the government should never tell people what they can do with their property ever. And you have other people who think the government should be able to tell you everything that you can do with your property. Judaism doesn't fit either version. Judaism says, yes, sometimes the government or the community can give you 100% rules of what you can do. And sometimes the government shouldn't tell you anything. It depends on the different circumstance. Judaism isn't about big government, little government, but Judaism is about where does the community have the right to tell you what to do, and where does it not have the right to tell you what to do? And it tries to draw that from the way it's learning out of the Torah. And it's very reluctant to take away from a private property, from a private owner of property. It doesn't want to limit what you can do. On the other hand, it also wants to protect every owner of the property. So sometimes it has to limit. And those are the two main things that it's balancing.
Rabbi,
Yes.
as far as I can tell, there's almost never a prohibition for doing something for visual aesthetic reasons, right?
Correct. Yeah, I don't remember any Mishnah that talks about if it's ugly, don't do it. Whereas, yeah, in the modern world, people get really caught up on how something looks. But as we all know, personal taste can vary, extremely. There was a house, just as one final example on this, and then, I think we can do Mishnah 5 as well. Where I grew up in San Diego, there was a house. We were out in the edge of the suburbs, so there was no homeowners association, nothing like that. And the owners of the house painted their house pink, and I mean like bright pink. This was back in the 70s and 80s, and it was right on a major road that went into our neighborhood area. And actually, it was a real dangerous curve, and a lot of people drove into their house. And we used to joke that maybe they painted their house pink so people would notice it and not drive into they kept getting, like, literally cars would be up in their yard, every year or so, because it was people were speeding, and then it would turn and then go like that right at their house. So if they kept going straight, they were in the person's living room. Anyway, they painted that house. People used to graffiti their house, writing things like "pink stinks" and other horrible things on their garage door to try and shame them into changing the color of their house. So yeah, people can get really upset about what something looks like in the neighborhood. Now, Judaism would say you have absolutely no right to damage someone else's property just because you don't like how it looks, right? Even if your property value has dropped because of the pink house in the neighborhood, it doesn't matter. You're not allowed to do that. And if you went to court, the court would also have told you you're not allowed, you're not going to force them to repaint their house into a better color. Right? Even if everybody agreed it was an ugly color, no one can actually force them to change it. Eventually, they put a lot of flashing lights to try and scare people away from speeding around that corner, and it did begin to help. But yeah, I remember all sorts of problems there when I was growing up. Okay, Mishnah 5. Aaron, we're back to you. I think this will probably be our last Mishnah for the night.
A person's ladder must not be kept within 4 cubits of his neighbor's dovecot. Dovecot.
Okay.
Because a small animal that eats doves should jump in.
Okay. So we got a row of buildings, right? A row of houses. And this is mine. This is his. And he's got a little area that has little nesting holes for doves, for pigeons, right? And they make their nest there. They live there. And I've got my ladder. And I put my ladder up on the side of my house, right? And they would have ladders all the time because people would use the roof for many things. So ladders were everywhere in the Mishnah time. My ladder has to be kept away 4 amot, right? Which is, again, about 6 feet away from his doves. Because otherwise, some little weasel is going to go up the ladder and jump, and it's going to eat all of his birds. Now, this is a very interesting change, right? Because I'm not causing direct damage to his property. right? This isn't me making a fire. This isn't me making smells. This isn't me digging a hole. This is me just putting a ladder up on my house. How can I be responsible for a wild animal? Well, you can't, because it's something that is a foreseeable problem. And this opens up a huge question in Jewish law that will be applied differently in many different places, because the circumstances can always change. Of you are still responsible for behaving in a reasonably cautious way to prevent predictable damage to your neighbor's property. I'm not saying that you can't have a ladder, but it is saying, look, if you put a ladder near someone else's doves, there's a good chance that they're going to get eaten. So move your ladder. That is a permissible position in Jewish law. Questions? Make sense? Okay. Part A.
His wall may not be built 4 cubits from his neighbor's roof gutter, so that the other can set up his ladder to clean it up.
Okay, same thing. If I have, a gutter on my roof, gutters were problems back then too, right? Just like they are today. I need to make sure that there's enough room. If I build a wall, like this, right? There needs to be at least 4 cubits so I can get to my gutter, right? If you build your wall near mine, you have to leave enough of a gap, like we talked about in the last Mishnah or the one before, so that I can get up there on a ladder and clear out my gutters. So we have here very interesting a parallel. We have a limit on where I can put my ladder, and then we have a limit on where you can build so I can still put my ladder. So the ladder needs permission, and the ladder needs a limit. Again, the ladder is fine, but there are brackets, right? Don't put it over here because it's dangerous. And then you tell the other neighbor, but don't block his ladder from being used, right? So both people have rights for the use of their property and the protection of their property. Make sense? Okay, good neighbors. Part 2, now we're going to talk about the limits on the doves.
A dovecote may not be kept within 50 cubits of a town, and none may build a dovecote in his own domain unless his ground exceeds 50 cubits in every direction.
All right, so this is about 75 feet or about 20 meters. So the problem is, if you build this, the dovecote in a town, then the doves are going to go out and they're going to eat seeds, right? That's what the birds eat. And now I might have seeds on my roof that are drying and pairing, or I might have seeds that I've just planted in my field. So if you put a whole bunch of doves near my property, your birds are getting fat off of my seeds. And that's not good, right? You're basically stealing food from me to put into your birds. So therefore, you need to keep it 50 cubits away, about 75 feet away. Now, is it true that the doves are never going to fly more than 75 feet? Of course, they're going to probably sometimes fly more than 75 feet. But most of the time, they're going to look for their food close to home. And therefore, you have taken a reasonable precaution to prevent your birds from damaging the people around you. Does that make sense? Okay. And then part A.
Rabbi Judah says 4 core space of ground, which is the length of a pigeon's flight.
Right. So Rabbi Judah, who loses, has a even bigger buffer zone. He says, wait a minute. A pigeon can fly like 200 plus amot. So that means you need to really keep it farther away than from your neighbor's field and house and everything. But that is the extreme length that a pigeon might fly away from its home on its own choice. So he ultimately doesn't accept, because the sages, again, are reluctant to tell you can't use your property the way you want. You can use it, but only within a limitation. But they don't want to make the limitation so big that you really are not allowed to fully enjoy your own property. Right? Right. Part B gets to our question of precedent.
But if he had bought it and it was built already in that place and there was only a quarters cob space of ground, he has a right to the dovecote.
Right. So if it was already built and he buys it when it's already built, right? I move in and I find out that the dovecote is too close to my neighbors anyway, I am allowed to continue to use it. Right? It's like we say, it's grandfathered in. That once it was already established, it is allowed to be maintained. but you're not allowed to build one that close. So that's sort of beginning our question of precedent. Make sense? Okay. Yeah, I think, you know what? Actually, I think we can do 6 because we did 5 quite quick. 6 is still talking about birds, and then we'll call it a night after Mishnah 6. Yerach, I think you're up.
How long does it have to be there before it's grandfathered in?
You mean get someone else to build it and then you buy it?
Yeah.
Well, if they were building it and it was too close and everyone knew that it was too close, then it would have been stopped from being built. So the question is, it has to have already existed long enough that people are used to it being there. So yeah, you can't just like throw it up overnight and then quickly do a sale in the morning and then say, hey, it's pre-existing. That would be a little cheating. Question 6.
If a young pigeon is found within 50 cubits, it belongs to the owner of the dovecote. But if it is found beyond 50 cubits, it belongs to I guess
To he who finds, to the one who finds it. All right, so I got a little baby bird, and the baby bird is 20 feet away from my dovecot. It's my bird. Now, the bird didn't have a little necklace on it, right? There's no like signature that it says it's my bird. But if it's near my dovecot, then it's presumed to be mine. And so if you find it and you see, oh, look, there's a guy who has doves over there, you take it to his house and you return it. On the other hand, if it is 60 cubits away, I pick up the bird and I say, oh, look, he has a dovecot. I'm keeping this bird because there's no way to assume that this bird belongs to him because it is far enough away that it could just be any old bird. And there's no way to know. Now, if the bird has a little marker on its leg, if it has some other way to identify it, then yes, you can find out who owns it and return it. But this just is a random bird, and you know they all look alike. It's just, if you ever looked at one pigeon, you've seen every pigeon. Then you're allowed to keep it as long as it's far enough away that you can't guess that it belongs to that guy. Good.
Okay.
Yes.
If it is found between 2 dovecots,
right, I've got one here, and he's in the field in between.
If it is nearer to this one, then it belongs to him. That owns this dovecote.
Right, the owner of dovecot, yeah.
And if it nearer to the other, it belongs to him that owns the other dovecote. So it depends on the distance.
Exactly. So imagine you've got 2 houses, right? But the distance between them is, what did we say? We're 50, right? 50, so yeah. Let's say the distance between them is only 75. So really, there's an overlap of the zoning that has happened. Because as we said, sometimes these would be grandfathered in. And they find the bird here. Well, even though it's technically within this one's catchment, it's closer to this guy, so it belongs to him. And vice versa. If it's over there, even though it's also within his range, it's closer to him, it belongs to him. But if it's found in the middle, what's the ruling? And if it's a like distance.
Oh, okay. If it is a like distance from either, they share.
Then you cut the bird in half. Right. Or more importantly, you exchange the value. So let's say the bird is worth 10, then each of them gets 5 if they sell it, or one of them can give 5 to the other and keep the whole bird for himself. So they share the value of it. It's very sensible, right?
So it's like King Solomon and the
baby. Like King Solomon and the baby, yes.
There's no
without a screaming mother.
Yeah.
People didn't have a sentimental value towards these birds, did they?
Not usually, no. The idea that an animal would be kept just as a pet is a very modern notion. Across the world, it's a very modern notion.
People didn't like the horses and stuff?
They like them, yes. And people would have attachment to their animals, yes. But the animal was still an animal. And the idea that an animal would be worth more to me just because it was my favorite animal, no one actually attached a monetary value to that. Yes, there was emotional connection to animals. I mean, people were not like cold, but there wasn't the idea that somehow it was a money number that would go with it, right? If you kill my poodle, I'm going to sue you for $1 million because I love that poodle. Like, no, the poodle is worth whatever a dog is worth. I know that you're going to be upset and you're going to cry, but it's still just a dog, right? So they separated the emotional connection to the monetary valuing of the animals. The animal was worth what the animal was worth, and what you felt about the animal was entirely up to you.
Because then I think it's the book of Samuel. Nathan goes to David talking
Mhm.
about the sheep, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And the issue there is, of course, that it is the only sheep that one guy has, and that he's very good to it, and it's emotional and everything, but it's still just a sheep. And if someone had killed your sheep by accident, they wouldn't have to pay you because of the emotional pain that killing your sheep caused you. They'd have to pay you the loss of the sheep, because it's just a sheep.
If you do it on purpose, it's really bad, right?
If you do it on purpose, you're still going to have to pay the penalty. But then, yeah, there would be additional penalties for, deliberately slaughtering someone else's animal. It'd be a
It was
theft.
like 5.
Well, because it's a theft at that point.
Yeah.
It's not just a damage or a loss. It's an actual theft.
Study.
We did.
Yes.
Yep. All right. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Yes.